Welcome home. We are WNST, AM 1570, Towson, Baltimore, and Baltimore Positive. Welcome in. It is Washington, Baltimore week. It's hate on the Yankees week if you're feeling that, or be happy about the Phillies, or be whatever you want. But the former Washington Redskins, now Commanders, are making their way up to Baltimore. We're going to be celebrating with some pizza on Friday at Pizza John's. It is my birthday on Monday. It was Luke's birthday last week. It's Leonard Raskin's birthday. He's coming out. My wife made some crab soup. We're going to have crab cakes. Yes, they have crab cakes at Pizza John's. They're delicious, actually. They have a country club crab cake there. You got to check it out. But nobody gets the crab cake because they get the pizza. But we're going to talk about that, as well as the meatball subs and the cheesesteaks and all the great things. The crinkle cut French fries and gravy. All of it brought to you by our friends at the Maryland Lottery. We'll have Ravens scratch-offs to give away. I have these have been a lucky batch, so all I can say is come to Essex on Friday and say hello and wish this guy happy birthday. Although he's already into the next year. He's already on to Washington. Luke Jones joins us now. He is Baltimore Luke. You can find him out on social media. He covers all things sports for us. Little shake-up going on at the warehouse this week. We'll talk some baseball at some point when things are less shaken up and we have true AL and NLCSs. But in the meantime, a way better football game, Luke, than maybe we drew it up back in April and just put Washington. That begins with a W. Let's call that a W. I don't know. This is a real game this week.
Certainly more real, right? Certainly a more imposing opponent than anyone would have anticipated. And I say that even as someone who really liked Jayden Daniels coming out of the draft and watching him at LSU last year and wondering if he was the best player in the draft. But it looks like the Commanders, the Washington football team, the team formerly known as the Blank Skins, it feels like they have a real quarterback. This kid, if you've watched him play, and I had a chance to review the Cleveland game this past Sunday, but even going back to what he did against the Bengals a few weeks ago, although I think we certainly acknowledge at this point the Bengals have their defensive challenges, but this kid can play. And I'll say this much. Yes, the Ravens are favored. Yes, they should be favored. Yes, I expect the Ravens to win. I do have my questions about Washington's ability to stop this Ravens offense nearly enough. But this is a Washington offense that, with a rookie who is not playing like a rookie, quite frankly, and I mean that as a major compliment, they're functioning at a high level. They're running the football, and Jayden Daniels, he can spin it. He can throw the football, and he can throw the football deep. As the Bengals found out a few weeks ago, as the Browns found out this past Sunday, and for a Ravens defense that just brought in Dean Pease, of all people, as a senior advisor, and we can get into that in a moment, certainly going to be some challenges that they present. But I think just in a general sense, and you just said it, this is exciting from a standpoint of how many Baltimore, Washington, Ravens, team formerly known as the Redskins, games have there been over the years? First of all, there haven't been that many because they play once every 4 years. But how many of those games have really been all that relevant in terms of both teams being good, both teams having optimism, both teams having aspirations for playing in January? Those examples have been few and far between. Maybe 2000, even though obviously Washington ended up flopping and firing Norv Turner, even though they beat the Ravens that year. Maybe 2016, that was early in the season. I think both teams had some aspirations then, but by and large, it's been typically the Ravens good, Washington not so good. And to your point, the W in Washington representing what was always anticipated to be a victory. The Ravens, they've got to do more than show up on Sunday. They've got to make sure they're doing some work on the defensive end to make sure that Jayden Daniels doesn't do what Joe Burrow just did against them this past Sunday.
Yeah, I go back to 96, and we play them in Olympic years. We played them in the 2000 season. Purple Rain won. Stephen Davis ran over Rod Woodson, if you remember that down there. I remember the rain game with Ray Lewis, the first time we ever went down there, and the stadium was falling apart before it was built. Saragusa came out and drank beer with us. You should remember these games. I remember there was a Sunday night game. We had a bus trip down there. I want to say it was in '04. That sounds right. And so in and out through the course of this rivalry, and you've covered a few Nats-Orioles tussles, and they've always, we're 20 years into that, and that doesn't mean anything to anybody. I mean, literally nothing to anybody. I don't know an Orioles fan that hates the Nats, even though they won. I don't know a Nats fan that hates the Orioles. They hated Peter because he screwed up their television network. I get that. But the rivalry itself, I mean, your old man's been gone 20 years. He came back. My dad's been gone 30 years. They'd say, hey, whoa, 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 whoa. We're not supposed to like them. And this whole DMV and we're all one and we all root for the Terps and he a Terp and all that. I'm a stock market guy when it comes to this. You know that. And last week I told you no one wanted to go to the Orioles game. You know how I know? Because there were 10,000 seats in the upper deck and it wasn't price point. Tickets were $10 and people didn't want to go. For whatever reason, they didn't want to go. Or they didn't get there or they couldn't work. We can go through all that.
Right.
Right now, $300 get-ins on Sunday for this game. Now, I had a few poor suckers licenses that I threw back over the side of the boat when Chad Steele told me I couldn't sit with my wife in the upper deck after sitting there for 26 years. But my seat right now is being scalped for about $400. So it's $300 to get in right now. That's Ravens fans gouging Commanders fans. Dude, they haven't filled their own stadium in 15 years. I don't know who their fans are. Their fans clearly have more affluence probably than our fans or more interest or whatever, but I don't know anybody that's run back to the Commander's tree. Although I had Tom Lavero on this week, I had Chick Hernandez, I've had Dave Preston, one of your pals from WTOP on, talking about how quickly people will come back to a winner when they've been starved and when their other options are the Nationals, the Wizards, Capitals. And let's be honest, the Washington football team, the former Jack Kent Cooks, they were always the number one thing in DC, right? They were always this dormant franchise that over the last 15 years has been, I don't know, dude, it's 1-1A with him and Angelos and that creep out in Oakland. There's just really been some really, really bad ownership in sports. These cities have endured that, and you know what I'm talking about. But on the other side, I don't know what makes a Commanders fan run back and be a part of it. But Jayden Daniels is a part of that. But these are people who didn't want to spend $5 on a ticket last year, let alone $200 or $300. That's the interesting part to see. And Dennis brought this up. Dennis Colatzos joined me this week as a guest on the show. And he's like, it's going to be interesting to see how many of them versus how many of us.
Yeah, I think that's fair. But I mean, I think it does speak to everything you just acknowledged, how a franchise quarterback or the perception of a franchise quarterback does bring hope and it does change everything. And it does rejuvenate a fan base that, I mean, let's face it. I mean, you said 15 or 20 years. I mean, really that Washington was a major force in the NFL. You have to go back to the early 90s. I mean, you have to go back to Mark Rippon and Art Monk. I mean, that was over 30 years ago. So you are talking about a franchise that has undergone a lot of damage, as you mentioned, from ownership and off the field and just not being very good, save for a handful of years where, okay, they made the playoffs. Maybe they'd win be in a position where they felt like they had a chance to win a playoff game. But the last time that you viewed Washington through a lens, and I don't think anyone's buying them as a championship team this year, but I think you look at the landscape of the NFC East and you look at the landscape of the NFC in general, and if Jayden Daniels, 5 games into his career, already looks the way he does, there certainly is optimism, and there's certainly optimism that he might be everything they thought RG3 was going to be prior to him hurting his knee late in his rookie year. So it is interesting from that standpoint. And yeah, I'm going to be interested to see what the makeup of that crowd is, because I was even talking to someone on Wednesday out at the facility, that they knew a couple people that were trying to get tickets, and they were saying that the secondary market had, that it, like you said, kind of gone through the roof for, a mid-October and mid-October game between two teams that are rivals in terms of geography, but in no other way, right?
Well, I mean, from our fan base, I don't think everybody's like, we got to go beat the Redskins. I mean, I don't think we thought like that this century ever, or thought this is a big game or a marquee game. So when I see $300 pricing, that's clearly them saying we want to be there, because our fans half the time don't show up to begin with the last 5-6 years since the Wembley knee. There's always empty seats. There's always giveaway tickets. There's always ads. Come see Lamar, buy tickets, buy tickets. I get served tickets to ads to buy my own tickets back all the time. This
Right.
is the week that if I want to buy my own tickets back, $336 for a pair in row 12 in section 513, and then 446 in the last row. I mean, clearly the Ravens are scalping the tickets too. So, I mean, having the tickets internally has blown up. And I would think the skyboxes, the regional part of this, that if you are a Bowie, Laurel, Rockville company and you know someone who knows someone, there's nobody. It's like, well, I'm not giving my tickets to a Commander fan. Dude, that was last century. That's what we did in 513. We didn't let the Steelers and the Browns and certainly not the Washington football team fans come up in our section with burgundy and gold. That just didn't happen in our section. That's over. I mean, it's over. It's over when they start throwing people like me out. But it's also over the last 6, 7 years where those empty seats fill in with Bills fans 2 weeks ago, or in this case, where the team's 30 minutes away. I am fascinated. I'm fascinated when the Eagles play here, right? Like what that will look like and even in preseason. I mean, even when the Phillies played the Orioles back in the summer, it was all Phillies fans. I look, my ego's not tied to it anymore, right? Like I used to get in fistfights 30 years ago about this fan stuff and your team sucks and my city's better than your city, all that. Like I would think it's embarrassing to have 30,000 Washington fans in the stadium, but the Washington football team has had 50,000 Eagles, Giants, Cowboys. That's the NFL at this point. When the Steelers travel and the Packers travel, they're coming and they're going to bring their fans. And this is a week where I think you'll feel it and see it a little bit. It won't feel as much like a Raven home game.
Yeah, well, and I would say on the flip side, I mean, Ravens fans travel to other places. I mean, we've seen that over and over and over. So some of it, especially when you have these AFC, NFC games, when you're not just talking about the division rivals that you play at home, home and home every year, you do have a little bit of a novelty factor. I mean, I think for Commanders fans, one, yeah, they're excited about Jayden Daniels. Two, it's like, okay, I can go see my team and I get to go see Lamar Jackson. That's appealing. I mean, I think it is. So, yeah, I mean, I don't know if it's going to be a takeover, but it's certainly going to be a presence. I mean, I think that you'd be kidding yourself just looking at the prices to not think that. But
Well,
I
our
mean,
fans aren't paying $300. I know that. You know what I mean?
I
Like
mean, I
I've watched our market here for 7 years. Our fans didn't pay $10 for a playoff game last week. So I mean, I know we're in a different spot here, Luke, and I'm not going to cry poverty and do small market, big market, and all that. In football, it doesn't matter. In baseball, it matters a lot in regard to payroll and what players you're going to have this time of the year to win baseball games for you. And I know you'll say, well, the Mets, whatever, teams get through. I hear all of that, but the NFL, that's not the issue. I mean, the NFL is mano a mano, and they all have plenty of money. They're all swimming in money. So, then it's about how put the team on field. Maybe this brings us to Dean Pease. Because the one place they can spend a lot of money is in coaching. And I talked to Tom Lavero about this week, and I talked to Chick. And I'm trying to figure out this Washington Commander thing. It's like, all right, new ownership, because we have that on the baseball side. And I'm like, what do we look? What are the vital signs that people want to spend $300 and run up here and buy a ticket in our ballpark, right? How did it happen so quick? You say quarterback, like all of that. Their coaching staff, I look like Dan Quinn's got like 3 former head coaches on his staff. Anthony Lynn, Kingsbury's running like all this stuff. In regard to the Ravens, we've been bitching the deficiencies in the defense, rookie defensive coordinator. We go through that. We like Zach Orr. I like Zach Orr. Um, and they go and get Dean Pease. This is the one spot where Dean Pease can say, I want $500,000 to come in for 6 weeks. Whatever it is, whatever the price is, they can afford it. And whatever the idea is, it's coaching staff. You can do whatever you want over there. The Dean Pease thing, as you wrote on Twitter, I didn't see that one coming.
Yeah. And look, I don't mean this in a way that I don't like the move or that I dislike Dean Pease or anything like that. I guess for me, I'd be lying to you if I didn't say that it didn't raise my concern a little bit, just from the standpoint of, okay, this isn't just chalking it up to, okay, some early season hiccups and new defensive coordinator. I mean, we talked about this with Mike Macdonald 2 years ago. I mean, there were hiccups Mike Macdonald's first year. Now Mike Macdonald's a head coach and was highly regarded as a defensive coordinator, in just a matter of 2 years. So I guess for me, like, I don't want to go as far as say I feel like it's a panic mode, but it is a acknowledgement of there are things that we're concerned about here, and that go beyond just, okay, it's the first few weeks of the season. I mean, I
Well,
guess
the
the one,
coach needs a coach, right? Like it's the way it looks, right?
yeah, yeah, and that's and look, do I think this is something that was forced upon Zach Orr? I don't think so. I think the reality is that Dean Pease was Zach Orr's defensive coordinator for his 3 years as a player. When Zach Orr, of course, had his congenital spine condition that forced him into retirement, he transitioned into coaching. Dean Pease was coordinator for one more year under that condition, and obviously was someone that he remained in touch with. I know that. I mean, I've talked to Zach Orr at different points over the last 7 years where Dean Pease has been a mentor to him. So they
Was Zach on that when his neck was bad? Did he start coaching right away? It felt like maybe he did. Like
he did.
he
So
wasn't out of the building for a year, right? Like he was there. I think he was there.
he came in, so he retired after the 2016 season. So it was January of 2017. If you recall, he had a temporary comeback attempt. He wanted to come back. He visited with some other teams, but ultimately it kind of sort of felt like no one was going to clear him. So, that was in June or July. It was, I want to say, late August. Training camp had already started, and they brought him in, and he was kind of a hybrid his first year. Kind of like what Ozzie Newsome did in the early '90s with the Browns,
It's an
right? When
internship,
he
basically, right?
Yeah, so he did some scouting stuff and he did some coaching stuff. So it was kind of a hybrid analyst kind of role. But a year into that, I mean, and I remember vividly talking to him about that, where he knew that coaching was his passion. That's what he was really going to get into. So he learned from Dean Pease and he's kept in touch with him. I know that. I mean, he mentioned him, cited him even during his introductory press conference back in January or February, whenever it was. And so he's had a relationship with him that he's kept up. So, I don't think this is, a power struggle or anything crazy like that, but it is an acknowledgement of you have a first year defensive coordinator. You also lost Anthony Weaver as your defensive line coach. You also lost Denard Wilson as your defensive backs coach. And we've seen them have all kinds of issues in the secondary. So, you bring in another set of eyes, another mind, someone who knows this system, albeit a system that has changed and evolved since 2017. And, you just have someone with experience. I mean, Dean Pease started coaching in the late 70s. I mean, he's coached over 6 different decades. So,
And he can't
uh,
stay away, right? Like he talked
oh,
retirement
sure,
here. They
he's
sort of shoved
retired.
him out. And then he went back and worked at Tennessee, right? For a while. And he's 75 and just wants to do it, right? Literally.
I mean, if you recall, he retired when the Patriots wanted to fire him, and then he landed in Baltimore as linebackers coach, coached Ray Lewis for a couple years, and then of course he replaced Chuck Pagano the Super Bowl year as coordinator. So lots of experience there. But again, just for me, I guess the perception of doing something like this, I admire the fact that they're leaving no stone unturned. If they really feel that this is a move that's going to help them. At the same time, the perception of it is, I don't panic move would be strong because we're not talking about firing your coordinator or anything like that, but it is an acknowledgement of, oh, this is not where it needs to be. So again, you can look at that as a positive or a negative. I don't think it's a negative move, but it was eye-opening to me, right? I mean, I wasn't sitting here at the beginning of the week thinking, could the Ravens bring back Dean Pease? I mean, he retired from the Falcons a couple years ago, and I know Zach Orr's close. That hadn't even entered my mind. So for them to do it, again, you can look at it one of two ways. There is a little bit of a, oh no, this is, they've got to bring in someone with more experience here, or there's a, hey, there are no egos here. Things aren't where they need to be. Let's bring in Dean. He knows the system. He knows our defense. He knows not too many of our players. I mean, the only guys left are Michael Pierce, Brant Urban, Marlon Humphrey. Although, interestingly enough, Kyle Hamilton, I asked him about just the fact that the Ravens did this. He actually spent time with Dean Pease on his top 30 draft visit with Atlanta a couple years ago. So got to know him a little bit. So it was just interesting to hear him offer his perspective. But, Hamilton kind of said it. Look, we're confronting everything right now as it pertains to our defense. I mean, we haven't been where we need to be. Yeah, we've stopped the run really well, but the pass game, I mean, we're 31st in passing yards allowed. We're, I think, tied for 26th in scoring defense. It needs to be better. Need to be better in the red zone. Need to be better on third down. Need to be better across the board. So, this is a move to your point. It's not something that requires salary cap space. It's not even something that requires someone else to be fired. I mean, he's brought in as a senior advisor. So we'll see. I think it's one of those moves that probably, if we're looking out into the next few months, that if they improve, it's probably going to be an overrated move because I don't think Dean Pease is going to come in and turn the defense upside down in terms of what they do. They're not going to change their system in week 6 or anything like that. But it's just another voice. It's another set of eyeballs. It's another brain. It's someone else to, as John Harbaugh described it, to be a sounding board. But they need to be better. Hamilton said it. I mean, we can't just keep talking about, we need to play 60 minutes or we need to tackle, we need to cover, we need to not have miscommunication on the back end of the defense. They need to do it. And even though this Washington offense isn't as talented across the board as Cincinnati last week, they don't have two receivers in Jamar Chase and T. Higgins, although Terry McLaurin's pretty darn good, so don't sleep on him. But they certainly, this is a move that certainly reflects some urgency to say, okay, all's not well here and we need to tighten things up. And if we can bring in someone with this kind of experience who knows us, who knows our defensive coordinator, and can be, bend his ear a little bit, be a sounding board, then that makes sense. So, I was surprised by it, but that doesn't mean I think it's a bad move by any means. I think it's one of those moves that if you have an opportunity to add someone and add another voice, then why not do it when you're having some issues, especially in the back end of your defense?
See, Dean Pease ask him if Tom Brady and Bill Belichick were systemically deflating footballs in Foxborough. There's some rumors linking him to that information now that he's here. I beat up on Harbaugh last week about the clock management and the red flag and all that stuff. Not that Dean Pease is a clock management, game management, head coach kind of guy, but I did mention, John could use a Marvin. I used Marvin Lewis. I used Dick Vermeil. I mean, I'm just throwing
Yeah.
stupid names out, but somebody to help him in the games. The Dean Pease thing to me is an acknowledgement that they need to get better, and I'm not shocked that they did it, honestly. Like when I saw it, I'm like, oh, it kind of makes sense. Rookie coordinator, guy they know, guy he knows, guys he trusts, guy that can't stay away from football, guy that has to be around it. And especially if they can get along. Because that was always your thing with Rosberg back and forth and his daughter and special teams. He and John are close, but how close are they? Do they really want to work together? Does Jerry want to work elsewhere? Pease is retired. No, he's not. He's going to go work for one of his other buddies. I don't need to tell you there's a lot of hooja involved with John Harbaugh and relationships. John still thinks he has a relationship with me and my wife. It's amazing. But nonetheless, the Dean Pease thing, I thought it kind of maybe didn't end. So, I never know when guys leave and they say, oh, I really enjoyed my time here. Wink Martindale, I really enjoyed my time here. Or whether it's, I wouldn't work for him again. Rex Ryan and John Harbaugh made it work here for about a minute. And they knew each other from Cincinnati. The egos in the coaching and just all of that. Mike Silver wrote a book on it. Mike's been on the show this week about, believe it or not, part of the Shanahan tree, the Mike Shanahan tree that begat the Kyle Shanahan tree, which begat everything you see around the league, which would be Raheem Morris and just a whole bunch of coaches that were McVay that were a part of it. The coaching tree really is weird like that when they bring guys back. And that's why it was a little weird for me. I'm like, oh, he's still in good. Because I don't think Pease and Belichick are in any way, right? I mean, there's some
No.
relationships that you don't go backwards, right?
Yeah, and I mean, let's also not use revisionist history here. I mean, Dean Pease' last game as Ravens defensive coordinator was the Tyler Boyd game. I mean,
Mm.
4th and 12. I mean, that knocked him out of the playoffs. He retires the next morning. Now, you and I can sit here and really wonder, was Dean Pease going to be retained as defensive coordinator after that? That I mean, I'm not saying he wasn't contemplating retirement because I mean, Dean Pease, he's 75 now. I mean, he was in his late 60s at that point in time.
Wink was getting that job, right? Pretty much. Is that right?
Oh,
I got to have it, the number. I'm trying to think of who was in line next because that's what it's
um,
always. That's always sort of the game is who's in line next. I mean, I know that from 30 years ago when Marvin and Brian were here.
I mean, I don't know. I don't know if that was. I mean, they interviewed other people for that job at that point in time. I think they decided on Wink Martindale, but
Right.
I'm not sure. But the point I'm making is he might have been fired if he didn't
Sure.
retire at that point. I mean, we talked about that. I mean, I remember vividly the radio that we did in the hours after that loss, where we were wondering what Steve Bisciotti was going to do with the head coach, let alone the defensive coordinator at that point. I mean, this was
A
in
thud.
2017. They had missed the playoffs 3 straight years at that point in
We're
time.
still in
So,
Flacco land then too. Yes.
yeah, this was 4 5 months before drafting Lamar Jackson, right? I mean, that's what we're talking about here. So, that was a very different time. However, I never got the sense that there was a falling out between John Harbaugh and Dean Pease. I think, if anything, at that point in time, it would have been it's just time to go in another direction. We love you. Thank you. You were our coordinator when we won the Super Bowl, 5 years before that. But it's time. I think there was a sense that it was time, and I think that may have led to Dean Pease saying, "Hey, I'm retiring," but then coming back out of retirement. What, 3 weeks later when we were at the Super Bowl because Mike Vrabel wanted him to coach his defense in Tennessee at that point in time. So, he's a lifer, right? And lifers never really truly retire. They get to a point where maybe the phone doesn't ring anymore for them to even do something like this. But with Dean Pease, he again, there's a familiarity here. I think there's a sense that, hey, he can help out one of his former players, someone that he early on was a mentor to in terms of making that transition to coaching, and see if there's anything that he can bring to the table to clean things up. Ultimately, I'll still come back to players got to do it, right? I mean, Kyle Hamilton. That's why I said. I mean, Hamilton didn't mince any words. He said we got to stop talking about this for 5 weeks. We've got to do it. I mean, we've shown we can do it for stretches. I mean, go back and look at the first half of the Raiders game compared to what happened in the fourth quarter. Go back and look at the Dallas game. The first 3 quarters of the Dallas game before what the Cowboys did in the fourth quarter. The Buffalo game, everyone thought, okay, the defense is fine, and then found out that it wasn't in Cincinnati. So, that Dean Pease isn't going to come in and fix all that. He might be able to offer a tip here or there, or clean up, something schematically here or there, or offer a suggestion that might do the trick from a personnel standpoint. I mean, who knows? But at the same time, I don't look at this defense and say it's all on Zach Orr, because, I mean, we've just seen it. Guys are missing tackles. Guys are blowing communications. Guys have, inopportune penalties. I mean, those aren't all things that you just put on coaching. I certainly don't want to be in the space, and I'm not suggesting you are either, Nestor. I certainly don't want to be in the space where the players get all the credit when you win and the coaches get all the blame when you lose, because that's a growing mindset that I see, not specifically with Ravens fans, just with sports fans in general on social media. It's the first reaction every time a team loses is fire the coach or fire the manager, and the first reaction when a team wins is it's all the players. All the players are great, and the coach is an afterthought. So, I by no means am I putting all of their early season issues on Zach Orr, but you do bring in Dean Pease and see if he can make a tweak here or there, or a suggestion here or there that might help this thing get to be more consistent. I still think the talent is there for this to be a really good defense overall, but it's like Hamilton said, you got to go out and do it. And you can't just chalk it up to, oh, well, it's been a tough schedule. Yeah, I get it. Joe Burrow, I get it. Dak Prescott, sure. Patrick Mahomes, of course, in week 1. But, Gardner Minshew also carved you up in the fourth quarter, and he just got benched by his team. He's no longer the starting quarterback. So, there's certainly, when something like this happens, I think it's one, it's a reflection that you'll leave no stone unturned, and two, it's a wake up call for everyone to say, hey, this isn't where it needs to be, and we just brought someone else in. So if we brought in, an advisor for the defensive coordinator, don't think for a minute that we won't bring in players here or there to compete if it comes down to that. So, I think it certainly serves as a message to everyone that things need to get better, and they do.
Let's talk personnel. Luke Jones is here. He is Baltimore Luke. You can find him out in Owings Mills. Find him anywhere at Baltimore Luke that social media served. And obviously out of Baltimore Positive, where we keep all of these wise conversations in our little repository. Great week around here. Todd Rundgren checked in. He's playing Sunday night up in York, Pennsylvania. I'm going to be going up there after the game at the Appel Center, formerly the Strand, up in your neck of the woods in York, PA. So you got to give me a dinner recommendation up there on the way in there. Also, just great conversations all week long with Washington media folks like Chick Hernandez and Dave Preston and Tom Lavero from the Washington Times. People I really respect with a lot of information about this game, this quarterback, this team. But we're here to talk about Ravens injuries. Marlon Humphrey, walking boot. You mentioned the defense. The one thing that I would say for this team, and knock on wood, which is my head in this case, my birthday this week, they've been relatively healthy. I
Yeah.
mean, at 3-2 and wherever they are, and whatever the foot on the line in Kansas City and bad things and good things that may or may not have happened to them on the record, the one thing for sure is that they have been far more fortunate on an injury front than they have been in recent years.
Yeah, they have been. I mean, there's no question. And I think that even adds to the disappointment defensively. I mean, even 2 years ago, with what was going on early in the season with Mike McDonald, transitioning as the new defensive coordinator, Marcus Peters was coming back from a torn ACL, right? And he wasn't quite right. And they had some other guys that were coming back. Tyus Bowser wasn't playing yet, for example. And you recall he was an important part of their defense at that point in time. So, they have been healthy. I mean, they have been in a position where I mean, what the only starter who's really missed time, Andrew Voorhees the last couple of weeks, and I'm not sure he's getting his starting job back. They might just keep McCary at left guard and Rosengarten at right tackle. I think that's quite possible. With Voorhees even back practicing fully this week, so that is where it's a little unsettling. And as you mentioned, Marlon Humphrey's on the injury report. I don't get the sense that this is anything overly serious, but I did go back and review it on the interception. He's running down the field and celebrating, and you don't see any issue with the ankle. Let me be clear. I'm not suggesting he tweaked anything in the process of doing that. However, he did sit out the final 6 defensive snaps, the final drive of regulation and the final drive of overtime when the Bengals ran it 3 times into the teeth of the Ravens defense. So that was notable. Ronnie Stanley dealing with a toe issue. Rashad Bateman, with what was listed as a groin after his best performance of the year. Again, it's earlier in the week. If these guys are back come Thursday, Friday, if we're talking, as someone's listening, if they're back on the field by that point in time, then there are no major issues, right? But we're kind of just going off of where they are right now in the week. And when you do have 5 or 6 guys that are missing practice on Wednesday, you at least pay attention to it, right? So those 3 guys, Arthur Millette's still dealing with a hamstring from, when he returned to practice last week. So he's not, I don't expect him to play this week. And a couple other depth guys, Malik Harrison's a little banged up. Broderick Washington's banged up. So, but to your point, they have been very healthy. And that's, again, for me, where it has been disappointing on the defensive side and saying, look, this has basically been their full cast of characters. And we're still seeing the inconsistency. I mean, the run defense has been great. The run defense has been outstanding. But, when it comes to the pass, and even in situations where they know the opposition is passing, we've seen this, right? There have been times where they flat out have known the Cowboys were going to pass, or they knew that Cincinnati was going to pass as that game went on because they knew that, that the Bengals really just couldn't run other than what Chase Brown had a couple runs early in that game. So, even when they've been able to make teams one dimensional, that hasn't seemed to matter. And that's disappointing. That's why you are looking at this. That's why you bring in an experienced coach as an advisor and Dean Pease to see if there's something else that, that the coaches are missing, that the players are missing in terms of what they need to do. So, but we'll keep an eye on the health. Again, anytime someone's in a boot after a game with Marlon, talking about Marlon Humphrey, you're at least going to question whether he's going to be out there the following Sunday. So, I do have some questions until we see him back on the field, but, have not gotten any indication whatsoever that this is, a major concern. But could it limit him? Could it potentially keep him out this week? Who knows? Again, you don't just wear a boot for the sake of doing it. So we'll see how the rest of the week goes as we get closer and closer to Sunday.
Anything else on this Jayden Daniels and stopping him, and the fact that I don't know, they have to stop Lamar in practice on certain days, lots of days, and running some level of scout team that maybe this defense is a little bit more prepared for what they're going to see. And it's not a Lamar offense as much as it might have just been more. I don't know what it is. It's 5 weeks. I've watched highlights of it. I watched one part of one of their games 2 weeks ago, just to watch him run around a little bit. But it's a mystery to me. I just see the highlights.
Yeah, I mean, I think the key for Jayden Daniels, and this is what's challenging, I think you do need to pressure him. I don't think you just let him stand back in the pocket because, I mean, like I said, he can spin it. He already is one of the best deep ball throwers in the NFL. I mean, just look at the deep passes he has made, whether standing back in the pocket or even on the run. So you need to pressure him. You need to find ways to put heat on him in the pocket. However, when you do that, you can't let him escape because he can also run. So this is definitely a challenge. To your point, I think that the fact that you go up against Lamar Jackson throughout training camp does help. They did just face Josh Allen a couple weeks ago, which isn't exactly the same, but Josh Allen, we know, can run away from you or try to run over you. So, there's certainly a dual threat, dynamic dual threat ability there. So, but again, with Jayden Daniels, I think what helps is the Washington running game has been critical to what they've been doing. And let's face it, no one's been able to run on the Ravens. So is Austin Eckler and Brian Robinson going to get enough room to keep Washington ahead of the chains and keep them in second and short and third and manageable? That's a big question because I think that puts a lot more pressure on a young quarterback going into what's going to be an exciting environment. Whatever the breakdown is of Ravens versus Washington fans, I mean, it's going to be fun, right? I
It's going to
think
be
it'll be a
full.
yeah. So it's going to be a fun atmosphere, regardless of how it sounds on any given down. But yeah, the challenge is I think you absolutely need to put heat on him in the pocket, but you can't let him bust out because he can also run 70 yards on you if you are undisciplined in your rush lane. So this is a challenge. Again, I don't think he has a dynamic group of pass catching weapons other than McLaurin. I mean McLaurin's great. Uh, you know, he I think Zach Ertz has been nice for him in terms of such a knowledgeable tight end, but he's so limited physically at this point in time. I mean, you know, he can catch one and get you 5 yards, but only
He's
if there's
not
five
beating
yards
anybody in a
there.
foot race at this
Yeah,
point,
he's
right?
he's not breaking a bunch of tackles and running away from you for 25 yards. So that hopefully should help that second to third level of the defense that's had issues. He's not certainly not dynamic like the Bowers kid for the Raiders a few weeks back. At that position. So yeah, the rest of their receivers are, I mostly guys. You got to cover them. Let's be clear. I mean, you can't have miscommunication and breakdowns that we've seen the Ravens have, quite frankly. But I think you've got to know where McLaurin is, and certainly, they're going to try to throw to their backs. With Austin Eckler, I think that's a key. That's going to be really key. With whether it's Hamilton, Roquan Smith, whoever, who's going to be responsible for running backs in the flat. That's something to watch. But very simplistically, you need to drop. You need to stop the run, and you've got to get heat on this kid. If you just let him stand back there in the pocket, he'll find someone open and he'll throw it into a tight window. I mean, he's capable of doing that. He's not playing like a rookie. Let's put it that way. It's 5 games. I get it. And Cleveland's a disaster. The Bengals defense stinks. We saw that last week. But let's face it, Ravens defense is far from elite right now. Let's call a spade 5 weeks into the season. So they've got to do the things to make him uncomfortable, but they have to be disciplined in the process of doing that. And that's going to be the challenge on Sunday. As I expect the Ravens to score plenty of points, plenty of points. The question is going to be, can they limit Washington enough to keep this from turning into a shootout that feels reminiscent of what we saw in Cincinnati last week?
Take care of the football. There's my warning for you. Anybody listening, take care of the football because you think we're just going to go up and down the field. You go up and down the field 5 times, but you turn it over twice. There's a problem. And taking
Sure.
care of the football will be paramount in this game. Speaking of Zach Ertz, we talked a little bit about Mark Andrews earlier. just in the framework of the offense, seeing so much. And by the way, Charlie Kohler got big run. I don't know Charlie Kohler, but I want to know him. He would be the first guy I want to bring out to the barn for a crab cake, and you let him know that. Back my previous life, we would do that. But he's a bit of a disappearing part of this, and they remerged last week. Like he's got to be a thing, right? I mean, unless Likely's going to be a thing, but somebody better be a thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, and that's what's just been so, and I don't even mean this as a knock on them because, I mean, look at the numbers. They've been one of the best offenses in football. I mean, you could argue right now that they're the best offense in the league. When you look at it statistically, you look in terms of DVOA, what they've done with the run, what they've done with their passing efficiency, even if not always high volume. It's worked. So you don't want to sit here and say that something's been bad because it hasn't been, but it has been odd, right? Just to see what it's been on a week to week basis. And so much of it, let's face it, I know you don't play fantasy football, but everyone else does. And there definitely is an element of just looking at the stats and it just feeling so odd and not seeing Mark Andrews anywhere close to their statistical leaders in terms of catches and receiving yards. However, go look at it. His 4 catches were in the fourth quarter on Sunday. Uh, he would have had a touchdown if Lamar Jackson doesn't underthrow him. He would have had, he also had the tough luck of the face mask on the last drive of regulation that if you kind of think about it, it was kind of lost in our discussion. If that face mask call is made, maybe they score a touchdown and they don't even force overtime. Maybe they win in regulation. So he was very much involved there. If you look at Pro Football Focus and some of these different analytics sites that track separation and things of that nature, there's nothing that's a major red flag as it pertains to Mark Andrews. It doesn't, there's nothing that suggests, well, he's not getting open anymore. It's just, they've just become so much more diversified in how they try to attack you. And that's why, as you and I were kind of breaking down the Cincinnati game, and, I've made the point of saying that, the best offenses aren't necessarily ones that have this ironclad identity that they do the same exact thing every week. I mean, of course, the running game has been the foundation of what they've done for 6 years now. We know that with Lamar Jackson and whoever else. And now you add Derrick Henry into that mix. But that said, you don't want to have an identity that's so rigid that the opposing team says, okay, if we stop this and this, hey, we're fine. We're going to win. You can't really say that about the Ravens because, I mean, Cincinnati bottled up Derrick Henry for 4 quarters and until the penultimate play of the game, right? I mean, Derrick Henry was largely a non-factor until that final run. But what did the Ravens do? Well, they were able to chuck it all over the field. And I think 6 or 7 different guys caught passes in that fourth quarter, when they were trying to stage a comeback from 10 down. So it's just become much more expansive. And I think, with the tight ends specifically, it's an interesting dynamic because when you look at their personnel groupings, they like having Patrick Ricard and Charlie Kohler on the field when they're running the ball. However, defenses notice that. So you want to be in a position where you have them on the field that you need to throw to Charlie Kohler sometimes, or maybe Patrick Ricard on a rare occasion because you become less predictable. So I'd much rather my identity overall to be as multiple as possible, assuming you can do all those different things well. You don't want to do things you're not good at. So we've just seen a much more multiple, much more diverse, much more of a contrast from week to week in terms of how guys play. I mean, we've seen weeks where Zay Flowers is barely involved, and Zay Flowers was incredible on Sunday, one of the best players on the field on Sunday. So it really is week to week in that regard. I think it's safe to say Mark Andrews isn't going to have a 1,000-yard season. It certainly doesn't feel like that ship's long sailed. But at the same time, I still think he's going to be critically important at some different points here coming up. Maybe not Sunday, but in the coming weeks, because again, I think with Todd Monken, his identity is wanting to make things as difficult as possible for the opposition. And again, it's not just about being predictable. It's not just handing the ball to Derrick Henry 25 times and Lamar running it 13 times. We've seen that. That works. That will work again at some point in time, no question. But you also need to be able to throw, and you need to be able to throw to your backs. We've seen them do that. How about the fact that we haven't even mentioned how good has this team been running screens? When have we said that about a Ravens offense? It's been years. maybe Ray Rice, if not longer than that. That they've run effective screen passes. So they've been able to do that with Justice Hill. So they can throw to their backs. They throw to their tight ends. Okay, they don't have the best wide receiver group in the NFL. No one's suggesting that, but Zay Flowers is pretty darn good. And Rashad Bateman had a really good game this past week. And even Tylan Wallace, the little used Tylan Wallace, had two big catches in the fourth quarter on Sunday. So, you know, I can run through a dozen names that aren't all great, aren't all going to make the Pro Bowl or anything crazy like that, but guys that are contributing. And when you have that kind of an offense, Todd Monken's talked about this. Greg Roman tried to do this at times, not successfully, but the key to having a great offense is you want to make the opposing defense have to defend every blade of grass on the field. And the Ravens, hasn't been perfect every week, but with their offensive line improving the way that it has the last few weeks, they've become much more dangerous in their ability to do that. So, yeah, I've wondered about. I have Mark Andrews on two of my fantasy teams, Nestor. That's hurt me from a personal standpoint because he's not putting up many points. But the Ravens, they don't care about that. They care about the fact that they're winning football games. And Mark Andrews, his time's going to come. We saw it in the fourth quarter on Sunday, and whether that means a breakout game this week, who knows? But I still think he can play, and I still think when it's all said and done, he's going to have some very big moments for this 2024 team.
Yeah, it doesn't feel like a 3-game winning streak because of, I guess, how you flap around to the end and try to win a game that you
Yeah.
might have lost. Had the kid hold the seams the right way on Cincinnati, you probably lose that football game. So, good vibes. Washington coming north. Good matchup. Expensive tickets. Two great quarterbacks. Two great black quarterbacks, which I had John Eisenberg on this week talking about his book and the history of all that. But I talked a lot more baseball with John because he's more baseball oriented. Some baseball, some football, a wide mixture of things, and some changes going on down at the warehouse as well. He is Luke Jones. You can find him at Baltimore Luke. You can find me anywhere Baltimore Positive is served. You can find us together at Pizza John's on Friday for our birthdays on the 11th. We're putting the Maryland Crab Cake Tour back out on the road. It's all brought to you by the Maryland Lottery in conjunction with our friends at Liberty Pure Solutions. They make my water crystal clean. I have well water. If you have well water, you need someone like them. Nobody better than them. 800 clean water. Speaks for itself. Liberty Pure Solutions, as well as plumbing needs. Also, our friends at Curio Wellness and Far and Dotter, putting us out on our 26th anniversary Oyster Tour. Oyster Day every day. I did that last month. You'll be seeing them platform this month. And just a lot of great guests this week in regard to the Washington football team. Todd Rundgren, the great Rock and Roll Hall of Famer, is going to be playing up in York, Pennsylvania at the Appel Center on Sunday night. Stopped by for about 40 minutes. Had a great conversation about meatloaf baseball. Todd Rundgren's kids played minor league baseball. He didn't know anything about baseball. He grew up in Philadelphia. So really good stories all the way around. And also, I want to point out for the very first time, because it's the end of the week and I won't have a chance to do this, and I'll cry if I talk about it too much. We lost Phil Jackman, who was really a father to me this week. So Phil Jackman, at the age of 87, which, as his daughters said to me, he had a good run. Not long enough, but long enough that we got to take him to a Capitals playoff game and watch them lose in Game 7 in overtime to the Flyers. So I have hours of Phil Jackman and I discussing Earl Weaver, Muhammad Ali, the Bullets, the Capitals, Pete Rose, just all sorts of things. A life well led, Phil Jackman. So I just want to give him some love because I'll talk about it more. Other than Ed Frankovic, I don't have a lot of people in my world that really knew Phil well to be able to have him on. But you'll get to know Phil well probably next week because I'm going to clean up these tapes because I did some retrospective work with him over hours. And he always hated doing my show. He hated Nasty Nestor, all of that. He was old and cranky and curmudgeonly. But usually when I got him in here, I had to tell you about the time I saw Ali Frazier. Let me tell you. So we'll get Phil Jackman in. That's a pretty good Phil, too. That's not bad. I am Nestor. He is Luke. We are WNST AM 1570, keeping the lights on for the legacy people that helped build this joint. Phil Jackman was one of them.